Sarah Mitchell was 27 years old when she decided she needed a radical change in her life. After years working as a financial analyst in Boston, she felt something was missing, that her existence was trapped in a suffocating routine of spreadsheets and endless meetings. It was during a sleepless night that she made the most important decision of her life: to enlist in the Army. Her parents were shocked, her friends tried to dissuade her, but Sarah was determined. She wanted to prove something to herself, to discover what she was truly capable of when placed under extreme pressure. The enlistment process was more difficult than she had imagined. The physical tests required months of intense preparation, and there were times when she questioned her decision. But Sarah was stubborn by nature, and this trait, which sometimes hindered her in personal relationships, now became her greatest asset. She trained tirelessly, waking up at 5 in the morning to run 10 kilometers. Before work, spending her nights at the gym, strengthening every muscle in her body. When she finally received her acceptance letter, she cried tears of relief and pride. Basic training camp at Fort Benning, Georgia, was a brutal shock. Sarah had never experienced anything like that intensity. The instructors were relentless, shouting orders that echoed across the camp from dawn till dusk. She was one of the few women in her platoon, and that meant all eyes were on her, waiting for her to fail. But Sarah refused to give anyone that satisfaction. She completed every exercise, ran every mile, carried every weight with a quiet determination that began to impress even the most skeptical instructors. There was something about Sarah that people noticed immediately: her shyness. She wasn't the type to shout back, boast about her accomplishments, or seek attention. When she wasn't training, she remained quiet, observing everything around her with those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to absorb every detail. Her platoon mates began calling her a ghost because she had the uncanny ability to be present without being noticed, to move through spaces as if floating. This quality, which had been a social disadvantage during her civilian life, here became an unexpected advantage. What nobody knew was that Sarah had a secret. Before enlisting in the regular army, she had spent 3 years in a special forces unit whose name could never be mentioned in public. Her previous life wasn't really about financial spreadsheets. That was just the perfect cover for the work she carried out in the shadows. Sarah had been recruited during her university years when a professor noticed her exceptional skills in linguistics and strategic analysis. What began as a translation job for government agencies quickly evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. During those 3 secret years, Sarah had participated in operations on 5 different continents. She had learned 6 languages fluently, mastered combat techniques few regular soldiers knew, and developed an almost supernatural ability to assess risky situations in fractions of a second. But an incident on a mission in the Middle East left her traumatized. She had lost her operations partner, a man named James who had become her best friend and confidant. The guilt she carried was unbearable, and she asked to be discharged from special services. Her superiors reluctantly agreed, but on one condition: she would keep her cover intact and never reveal her true experience to anyone. Now, there she was, back to square one, like an ordinary recruit in basic training. It was a surreal experience, almost comical at times. Instructors shouted instructions on how to hold a weapon, and Sarah had to pretend she was learning it for the first time, when in reality, she could disassemble and reassemble it blindfolded in less than 30 seconds. When they taught basic hand-to-hand combat technique, she had to restrain her instincts and movement, making it seem like she was struggling to master simple movements. When her body knew attack sequences that could neutralize an opponent before he even realized what had happened. The real reason Sarah was there was complex. After James's death, she went through a profound identity crisis. She no longer knew who she was when she wasn't on a mission. Her secret life had consumed everything, and when she tried to return to normalcy, she discovered there was no normalcy to return to. She had no real relationships, no genuine hobbies, no version of herself that wasn't built around lies and disguises. Basic training was her attempt to rebuild an identity from scratch, to experience what it would be like to be an ordinary person doing ordinary things. even if it meant feigning incompetence in areas where she was extraordinarily competent. The incident occurred during the 8th week of training. Sarah and her platoon were returning from a forest navigation exercise when they crossed paths with a group of soldiers from an elite unit who were using the same facilities for advanced training. They were large, confident men with that air of superiority that comes from years of service on difficult missions. Sarah kept her head down as she always, trying to go unnoticed as her group moved along the narrow path. One of the soldiers, a huge sergeant with arms covered in tattoos, noticed Sarah and made a sarcastic comment about nervous recruits who probably shouldn't be there. His comrades laughed, and Sarah felt her blood boil, but she kept a neutral expression. She had faced far worse than a few idiotic comments from a uniformed bully. But then he made a mistake. He grabbed her arm as she tried to pass, pulling her close with unnecessary force, saying she should show more respect when real soldiers were present. It was an automatic movement. Sarah's body reacted before her conscious mind could process what was happening. In a fraction of a second, she had twisted his arm, shifting her weight in a way that completely unbalanced, and he was on the ground before he realized what had happened. The silence that followed was absolute. All the soldiers, both recruits and those from the elite unit, stood completely paralyzed, staring at the scene with expressions of utter shock. Sarah immediately regretted it. She had broken her cover, revealing reflexes and skills that an ordinary recruit would never possess. But it was too late to turn back. The sergeant on the ground looked at her with a mixture of anger and confusion, beginning to rise with clearly hostile intentions. It was then that Sarah made a decision. With deliberate movements, she opened her uniform just enough to reveal something tucked inside her shirt, a small silver insignia that very few people in the world would recognize. The sergeant froze when he saw the insignia. His face underwent a complete transformation, from anger to shock, and then to something bordering on terror. He knew that symbol. All the elite soldiers knew it. It was the mark of a unit so secret that its existence was officially denied. An organization that operated in the most dangerous places in the world, doing work that no other group could do. The fact that Sarah was wearing that insignia meant that she wasn't just any operative. She had reached the highest rank within that unit, a feat that fewer than 50 people in the entire world had achieved. The other soldiers in the elite unit also saw the insignia, and the change in atmosphere was instant. They respectfully stepped back, and the sergeant who had been on the ground quickly stood up, straightening his uniform and giving a formal salute. Sarah did not return the salute. Instead, she simply buttoned her uniform, covering the insignia again, and said in a low but firm voice that she was there as a recruit and expected to be treated as such. There was an authority in her tone that could not be questioned, despite her official rank being the lowest possible. The sergeant swallowed hard and nodded, muttering an apology. His comrades did the same, and then they quickly turned away, casting reverent glances at Sarah as they disappeared down the trail. Sarah's platoon recruits were completely bewildered, not understanding what had just happened. They had seen their shy, quiet colleague take down an elite soldier in a second, reveal something that turned tough men into frightened children, and then return to her humble demeanor as if nothing had happened. In the following week, rumors spread throughout the base. No one knew exactly what had happened, but everyone knew there was something extraordinary about the quiet recruit in Charlie's platoon. Soldiers who wouldn't normally pay attention to recruits began to observe Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Instructors who had been harsh with her began to treat her with subtle but noticeable consideration. Sarah hated the attention, but she knew there was no way to avoid it now. The base commander called her in for a private meeting. He was a veteran colonel with 30 years of service, a man who had seen practically everything the Army had to offer. He closed his office door and studied Sarah for a long moment before speaking. He said he had made some calls, spoken to some people in very high positions, and now understood who she really was. He wanted to know why she was wasting her time on basic training when she could be doing real work, saving lives, making a difference. Sarah explained, for the first time aloud to someone other than herself, about James, about the guilt, about feeling she had lost her humanity somewhere between the secret missions and the false identities. She said she needed to start over, rediscover who she was when she wasn't in survival mode. The colonel listened silently, and when she finished, he nodded slowly. He said he respected her decision, but that she should know the world still needed people like her, that there weren't many people with her unique combination of skills and character. When Sarah left the colonel's office, she felt strangely light. Talking about James, about his reasons, about his fears, had released something she didn't know was trapped inside her. She returned to her quarters and, for the first time in years, slept soundly without nightmares. The final months of basic training were different. Sarah no longer needed to completely hide who she was. She still kept a low profile, still avoided drawing unnecessary attention, but now there was an authenticity to her presence that hadn't existed before. She began to help other recruits who were struggling, offering subtle tips that made all the difference. She never revealed the full extent of her knowledge, but she shared enough to uplift the entire platoon. There was one recruit in particular, a young woman named Emily from somewhere in the Midwest, who was having terrible difficulties with practically every aspect of the training. She was physically weak, clumsy, and seemed completely out of place. Most of the instructors had given up on her, assuming she would be dismissed before the end of the training. But Sarah saw something in Emily that others didn't, a fierce determination hidden beneath a surface of insecurity. She began working with Emily in her spare time, showing her more efficient exercise technique, helping her gradually build confidence. Emily's transformation was remarkable. In a matter of weeks, she went from being the worst recruit in the platoon to being in the middle of the ranking. It wasn't just the physical improvement, it was the change in her posture and how she carried herself. Sarah had given her something more valuable than technique. She had given her confidence. And in doing so, Sarah began to rediscover something important about herself. She realized that her true strength lay not only in her combat skills or the languages she spoke, but in her ability to see potential in people and help them achieve it. The graduation ceremony was simple but moving. Sarah was in the middle of the formation, wearing the same uniform as everyone else. But now, she knew she didn't need secret insignia or special recognition to have value. She had found something she had been searching for since James died, a sense of purpose that didn't depend on adrenaline or danger. As she marched with her platoon, she looked at Emily, who was marching with her head held high and a proud smile on her face, and Sarah knew she had made the right choice in returning to the beginning. After graduation, Sarah received orders for a regular infantry. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't secret, but it was real. She was ready for this new phase, to build a life that was genuine and meaningful. But as she packed her things to leave, the colonel appeared once more. He had a proposition. There was a position opening in a specialized training unit focused on preparing soldiers for high-risk situations. They needed someone with real experience, someone who could teach not only techniques, but also the mindset necessary to survive and thrive under extreme pressure. It was a chance to use everything she had learned in a way that could save countless lives without having to return to the shadows. Sarah thought for a long moment. It was tempting, but she was afraid that by accepting this position, she would only be finding another way to hide from a normal life. But then she realized something fundamental. There was nothing wrong with using her unique talents, as long as she did it for the right reasons and maintained real connections with the people around her. She didn't have to choose between being exceptional and being human. She could be both. She accepted the position. Sarah arrived at her new base at Fort Bragg in North Carolina on a cloudy October morning. The specialized training complex was significantly different from the basic facilities she had just left. Here, everything had an air of heightened seriousness, from the guards at the entrance to the gray buildings that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who looked at them. She carried only a standard military backpack with her essential belongings, refusing to bring more than necessary. This simplicity was part of who she had chosen to become. The commander of the training unit was a major named Davidson, a man in his 50s. with military-cut gray hair and eyes that had seen things most people would never imagine. He wasted no time with unnecessary formalities when Sarah showed up at his office. He went straight to the point, saying he had reviewed the entire file, including the parts most people with security clearance would never see. He knew exactly who she was and what she had done during those 3 secret years. Davidson explained that the unit Sarah was now part of was responsible for preparing soldiers for the most extreme situations imaginable. They trained teams that would be sent to active war zones for rescue missions in hostile territory, for counterterrorism operations, where a single mistake could mean not only their own death, but the deaths of countless innocent people. The program's pass rate was only 30%. Most applicants dropped out or were eliminated before completing the 6-month course. Those who managed to pass became part of an elite within the elite. In the early days, Sarah observed more than she participated. She watched the veteran instructors studying their methodology, identifying what worked and what could prove. There was one instructor in particular, a sergeant major named Rodriguez, who was known for his brutal harshness. He believed that the only way to prepare soldiers for hell was to put them through hell during training. Sarah didn't necessarily disagree with the philosophy, but she noticed that his approach often broke the trainees' confidence instead of strengthening it. During an urban combat training session, Sarah witnessed Rodriguez publicly humiliate a trainee who had made a tactical error. The young soldier, who couldn't have been more than 22, was visibly shaken, his confidence shattered in front of the entire group. Sarah knew that this type of approach could create soldiers who functioned mechanically, but would panic when confronted with truly unpredictable situations. She waited until the end of the session and then discreetly approached Rodriguez. The conversation that followed was tense. Rodriguez had decades of experience and didn't appreciate a newcomer questioning his methods, especially a woman who technically had a lower rank than him. But Sarah didn't back down. She spoke calmly, explaining that she had been in situations where soldiers trained in his way simply froze because they had never learned to trust their own instincts under pressure. She shared a story of a mission where she and James had been caught in an ambush, and it was their ability to think creatively, to improvise fearlessly, that kept them alive. Rodriguez listened with an unreadable expression. When Sarah finished, he remained silent for a long moment before asking what she would suggest doing differently. Sarah said that public humiliation didn't build resilience, but rather taught soldiers to fear the judgment of their superiors more than real enemy. She proposed an approach where mistakes were treated as learning opportunities, where trainees were intensely challenged but also encouraged to develop their own decision-making abilities. Rodriguez considered her words and then, surprisingly, said that she should conduct the next session however she saw fit. Sarah's first session as lead instructor was the following week. She had prepared an elaborate training scenario simulating a hostage rescue situation in a complex urban environment. The trainees were divided in 2 teams and given limited and often contradictory information about the situation. Sarah didn't give detailed instructions on how to proceed. She simply set the parameters of the mission and told them to begin. She wanted to see how they thought, how they made decisions under pressure, how they worked as a team when there wasn't a clear manual to follow. The exercise was chaotic. Some teams did reasonably well, others failed spectacularly. But Sarah didn't yell. She didn't humiliate anyone. Instead, after each team completed the scenario, she sat down with them and conducted a detailed analysis of what had happened. She asked questions that forced them to reflect on their choices, to understand not only what they did wrong, but why they made those choices. She shared insights from her own experiences, not arrogantly, but as lessons painfully learned in real-life situations. There was one trainee in particular who caught Sarah's attention. His name was Marcus, a young African-American man from South Philadelphia who had joined the army to escape a neighborhood where most of his childhood friends were dead or in prison. Marcus had all the necessary physical skills. He was fast, strong, and had excellent reflexes, but he carried a deep anger that Sarah recognized because she herself had carried something similar after James's death. This anger caused Marcus to make impulsive decisions, making him aggressive when he should have been cautious. Sarah began working with Marcus individually after regular training sessions. She didn't try to do therapy with him. She wasn't qualified for that, and it wasn't what he needed either. Instead, she taught him breathing and mental focus techniques she had learned during her own Special Forces training. She explained that anger could be a powerful tool if channeled correctly, but that it could also be his greatest weakness if he controlled it. Marcus was resistant at first, interpreting her attention as pity, something he despised above all else. The turning point came during a jungle survival exercise. The trainees were dropped into small groups in a remote area with minimal equipment and instructions to reach an extraction point 50 kilometers away within 72 hours. Sarah accompanied Marcus's group as an observer. On the second day, the group faced a series of problems, ranging from minor injuries to dehydration. Marcus, who had been designated as the team leader, began to lose control, his anger surfacing as he blamed other group members for the problems. Sarah intervened. She called Marcus aside and had a frank conversation with him. She said she perfectly understood the anger he felt, that she too had lost someone important and had let that pain almost destroy her career and her life. She told someone other than the colonel about James for the first time. She described how guilt and anger had become a poison inside her, how she had almost given up on everything because she couldn't forgive herself for not saving her partner. She told Marcus that he had a choice right now. He could let the anger continue to drive his decisions and eventually it would destroy him. Or he could learn to transform it into something constructive. Marcus remained silent for a long time after Sarah finished speaking. Then, for the first time since arriving at the training unit, he lowered his defenses and admitted he was scared. He was afraid that if he managed to complete the training and went into real combat, he would do something stupid that would result in the death of his teammates. He was afraid of becoming just another statistic, another young black man killed before the age of 30, only this time on a battlefield instead of the streets of Philadelphia. Sarah said that this fear was good, that it meant he cared, and that soldiers who weren't afraid were dangerous because they underestimated the risks. After that conversation, something changed in Marcus. He remained intense and focused, but now there was a different quality to his intensity. He began to think before acting, to consider the consequences of his decisions for the entire team instead of just reacting impulsively. His group successfully completed the survival exercise, and Marcus received praise from Davidson for the leadership he demonstrated during critical moments. Sarah watched his progress with a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in a long time. She was making a difference in a tangible and immediate way. As the months passed, Sarah's reputation grew at the grassroots level. Trainees who had previously failed under other instructors began to excel under her guidance. It wasn't that she was any less demanding. In fact, she pushed them just as hard as any instructor. But she combined this demanding nature with a genuine understanding of human limitation and an ability to see the unique potential in each person. She developed training exercises that were simultaneously brutally difficult and profoundly educational, creating situations that forced trainees to confront their deepest fears and weaknesses in controlled environments. One day, Davidson called her into his office again. There was a real mission, not an exercise. A team of American contractors had been kidnapped somewhere in West Africa. The situation was complicated because the kidnappers were part of an extremist group that had political connections in some sectors of the local government. A traditional rescue operation could cause an international diplomatic incident. The Pentagon was considering sending a small, discreet team to attempt an extraction, but they needed someone with knowledge of the region and experience in sensitive operations to help with the planning. Davidson said he had recommended Sarah to join the planning team. He wasn't asking her to return to field operations, only to use her knowledge to increase the chances of mission success and reduce the risk to the soldiers who would be deployed. Sarah felt a familiar rush of adrenaline as she listened to the details of the situation. It was exactly the type of scenario she had specialized in during her years in Special Forces. She knew the region, understood the local political dynamics, and could identify potential pitfalls that someone without direct experience might miss. She agreed to help. In the following days, Sarah worked intensively with the planning team, reviewing maps, analyzing intelligence, identifying extraction routes and contingency points. She shared insights that only someone who had actually been on the ground could have. Small details about local traffic patterns, prayer times that would affect civilian presence, geographical features that didn't appear on satellite maps but could make all the difference. Her contribution transformed a risky plan into one with a realistic chance of success. The mission was executed 3 weeks later. Sarah wasn't part of the field team, remaining at base, while the operation took place on the other side of the world, but she was in the operations room the entire time, monitoring communications, ready to provide guidance if anything went wrong. The hours passed in excruciating tension. After 7 hours, confirmation arrived that the team had successfully completed the extraction. All the hostages were safe, and none of the operators had been injured. It was a complete victory. When Sarah finally emerged from the operating room at dawn, exhausted but relieved, she found Marcus waiting outside. He had heard about the mission and wanted to know if she was all right. Sarah was touched by the genuine concern in his voice. She said she was fine, just tired. Marcus commented that he hoped to one day be good enough to participate in missions like that. Sarah looked at him seriously and said that he was already on the right track, but that being good enough didn't just mean having the skills. It meant having the judgment to know when to use them and the wisdom to live with the consequences of your actions.